Welcome, guys. Welcome to the Brand Identity Design Business Podcast. My name is Jason. I am your host for today's show, and I have been doing this series called as The Dark Side of Entrepreneurship. I think since 2022, January of 2022 onwards. It's almost been 2 years. I love interviewing people from different parts of the world, unique perspectives, interesting things which they have to share. And I accidentally became a podcaster similar to Ian. Ian became my guest. His name is Ian Paget, and he accidentally became a logo designer, and I accidentally became a podcaster. We would be getting into this discussion today. I want to thank each and every listener listening to us either live or on replay. Thank you so much for your love and support. My podcast is heard over 33 countries based on the most recent analytics. Still ranking on Spotify's top 30%, and on social media, I think my podcast is shared. It's on the top 5% most shared podcast on social media. I have also applied for the ISA Awards. It's India Audio Summit Awards for being one of the best podcasts for 2024. Wish me luck, guys. I think the results are expected to come first week of March. If I win it, I'm going to be on television, so I think that's going to be super cool. So shout out to all my listeners, supporters, and friends. Today's episode is actually about making a living designing logos. So in this thought-provoking episode featuring Ian, okay, I know I have been following Ian for more than 2 years, at least from the time I've started being a graphic designer. He's an accomplished logo designer with more than a decade of experience in this field. And Ian will share insights from this book which he recently written. It's called as Make a Living Designing Logos. It's the same as the episode title, just to make things easy for our listeners. And you will understand how he turned his passion for logo designing into a thriving career. You will discover the fundamental knowledge every logo designer should possess and gain a comprehensive understanding of the logo design process. This episode is going to be tailored towards entrepreneurs, logo designers, design enthusiasts, or individuals who are simply looking to turn their passion for logo design into a successful career. Ian is also the host for the most popular podcast. Is called as the Logo Geek Podcast. I will highly encourage you to go on Spotify or Apple, find this podcast, listen to some of the episodes. Do rate his podcast. Is one of my favorites, which I regularly listen to, where he shares an expertise and he interviews other leading designers and marketing experts in the industry. Ian has also established himself as a respectful voice in the design community. And his passion for the craft is evident in everything he does. So I want to say that, Ian, thank you so much. Let's virtually, have some noise. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I see that my good friends, Heather, Izzy, Arkai, Leslie, and Jay and everybody else who has joined. Thank you so much, guys, for your love and support. Thank you so much for being here and supporting us. Ian, let's start off with the interview. I want to really, ask you a question. Let's go back in time a bit. Sure. I want to ask you, do you remember that moment in your journey when you recognized that the passion you have for logo design can become like a career, and it's feasible for you to get into this? What was that pivotal moment? Could you describe that? Help us understand what it was, what made you decide, what made you get into this, and you
Sure.
decided to have this like full time. Let's I want you to speak on that, and I have a follow up question after that. Go ahead.
Of course, of course. And prior to answering that, I want to say, what a fantastic introduction you did there. And for everyone listening, Jason's organization for podcasts is phenomenal. Like I've done loads of interviews over the years, and he's the most organized podcast host. So huge credit to him. Uh, so to answer your question, it's actually a difficult question because I wouldn't say that there was like an immediate moment where I had this like eureka moment and thought, yeah, I'm going to be a logo designer, and that's the way it went. It really was a very gradual process. So I was quite lucky early on that I sort of landed my lap on I managed to get into a job that was part graphic design. And then I ended up moving on to a web design agency that did have a small percentage of logo design. But where things really took off, I would say, is my personal projects. So for a long time, I pretty much dabbled in anything that took my interest in my free time. So I have literally done things like movie posters, animations, sort of computer games, all sorts of stuff over the years. And it was really after sort of working on a computer game that was a very lengthy project that I really enjoyed, but it really like we spent maybe 4 years on that, on and off. Um, and it was exhausting doing that on the side of a full-time job. And that's when sort of logo design as a side venture came on the scene because I worked on this project that lasted years, but in comparison, logo design is something where I could take a project on and 2-3 weeks later that project would be done. um and what I really liked about it back then is it it contained lots of things I had an interest in back then. So I in my full-time job back then, I used to do a lot of technical product illustrations for a medical company, and I really enjoyed doing that. But then I also liked the sort of problem solving. So there was a lot of different layers to this. So I thought back then that would be interesting. But where things really cemented was kind of down to growth and success, really. Because I used to do a lot of different side projects, and dabble in all these different things and have lots of different ideas. And when you start seeing something growing and succeeding, um it it gives you an incentive to sort of push that area, because it's like, oh, this is going really well. I should i should continue in that area. And what really pushed me over the edge to really commit was the success of my website was ranking well on Google. My social medias were growing. Everything was really falling into place. And although I never actually planned to work for myself, my goal was always to um, go up the corporate ladder. The more traditional way, where I'd work for different companies and then maybe go and work for like a branding agency or something in London. So I never actually planned to work for myself. But when everything is growing and you're getting emails coming in and your phone's ringing, it's a no-brainer to really lean into that. And um over the years, I've been doing this for over 10 years now. um it becomes a passion. Like you want to know more, you want to read as much as possible, you want to speak to as many people as possible. And um yeah, it's pretty incredible to be in this position where um it's kind of my life now, as sad as that sounds. um I mix making a living as a designer and spending my life with my daughter. It's very integrated. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It does answer my question. Wow, wasn't that like an amazing journey? Who expected that you learning web design and SEO at that firm would actually translate into helping you with your website and ranking
Hmm.
on Google? And I know working on that game for 4 years. Wow. In a year there are 365 days. Imagine working on that for four
I mean,
years.
it wasn't like we was doing it every day. It was more that you know, it took so long because we ended up creating mock-ups, and then we ended up getting a game company called Chilingo involved in it. So it started to get quite serious. And then we ended up having to redesign it. It wasn't like it was on it like I wasn't spending every day on it, but it was a continuous project over that time. So maybe like an hour here and there, or like every other weekend or something, creating something for it. So it was a very lengthy project, and the work I did back then is amazing. Like when I look at it, it's still, you know, um, it's one of those pieces of work where I look back and said, I that work that I did back then was really good. um, but yes, I don't think I could ever work on something like that. It's too big, takes too long. It's yeah. I prefer the smaller projects that are kind of in and out.
I completely resonate with what you're trying to say. So, I mean, something which you guys probably may or may not know, Ian is an amazing human being and also a very responsible father, because he not only looks after his daughter, okay, and does these side projects. And I don't know if you guys understand, he manages all these things by himself, looks after his daughter, do the house chores, and manage everything and still execute these projects. I think kudos to you on that, Ian. That's tough. And you're still able to do all this stuff. Hats off to you, my friend. So I
It
just
looks like I'm organized, but I'm not. I am online.
Okay, all right, all right. I want to ask you my follow up question to your story. What I like to ask you is that, see, transitioning and making this to like a full time career may not be very easy, because I think you lose the umbrella, the cover, the health insurance, all those benefits, the recurring salary which you get every time. So
Mhm.
before you got into this, what was your frame of mind? Was it too risky? How was this transition for you? How did you
Oh
navigate?
man, so it so actually initially deciding to take that leap wasn't something I took lightly. And I so I've for quite a long time I had a full-time job. I ended up becoming a design director at this small web design agency. So it was a very demanding job. It paid well. I was doing really well in that job. We worked for like all the big projects that came in, like all the branded stuff that always came to me, which was pretty cool. So and they kind of left me to it. So it was a good job in that sense. And it's the kind of thing that could easily have been a job for life. And like I said, I never actually planned to work for myself. So I was in this position where I unintentionally built this thing that was succeeding at home, and then I'd go into work. And I was really torn between the two, because I would, if you can imagine, I would go into work. I'd have that kind of long commute. It often took an hour to get to work sometimes. And then I come home late, and it's quite difficult to do both. To have something going on the side and your full-time job. And back then, my thought was to actually, stick to the full-time job, stick to, what, uh, how I was brought up. Um, my model in my head of how you operate in life is to have a job. um, So I decided when it came to the point of having to choose one, because it was too overwhelming to do both, I did immediately pick day job, secure pay and stuff like that. Um, but it was very difficult, or rather impossible, to switch the switch and like abandon something that I created that was a success. So there was, a few years of being torn between the two and kind of being stuck in limbo. And what actually pushed me over the edge was my mum passing away. So my mum died. She had vascular dementia, and I would go into the home. So, was experience. I was spending time with people that was at the end of their life, and it interestingly, I ended up having a positive from it, whereby I didn't want to get to that and regret not doing certain things. And going full time and really going all in on what I built with Logo Geek was one of those things. And I pretty much decided, I need to go and hand in my notice. I know this is going to work because I've got enough leads and stuff coming in. Um, and I wrote out my cover letter, took it into work, and we had a meeting, and they ended up giving me a part-time position instead. And that actually worked quite well, because it meant that I still had the secure income, but then I suddenly had the time to start working for myself. In terms of like really going fully all in, uh, that was daunting, because when you work for yourself and you are the breadwinner, I have no backup. Like, I don't have any parents or anyone that I can fall back on. Like, literally, if the money isn't coming in, I'm well, I won't be on the streets. I'm sure I could find something, but that's it. It wouldn't be a good situation. So, it was obviously scary because, like I said, I've got a little one. Um, but what actually did push me over the edge to like jump ship, and go from part time to fully committing, was my daughter. So I kept getting messages, like text messages with photos and stuff. Uh, you know, and 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 this was sort of not long after she was born, and I felt like I was missing out on stuff. And kind of hearing like random words that she would come out with, and sort of feeling like I'm missing out. So there was that. But what really pushed it over the edge was sitting down and working out the numbers. So I sat down and I worked out, how much do I need to bring in to replace this part-time position? And I wish I did that a long time ago, because uh, when when you think of annual salaries, you don't really work out what that is on a daily basis. And I literally could have replaced my part-time salary, which was a good salary. Um, I literally needed like one or two projects extra, and I had the leads coming in. I had the capacity to do it. So, I just decided, yeah, let's do it. And worst case scenario, if the leads didn't come in, I could um just get my job back. I could go back and say, "Do you mind? Can I get my job back?" I think they would have took me back. Um, and as soon as I did that, I just literally went all in. Like, I really just worked day and night, just like updating my website, and like, you know, literally, if I wasn't in my full-time job, I was sat down at my desk working, trying to get book projects in and everything like that. I pre-booked projects in for 3 months ahead, and I landed a really nice sponsorship deal for my podcast, and they paid 12 months in advance, which was a lot of money. So I had this nice safety net, took the leap, and then it was COVID. But it was fine because I had so many projects booked in. I had the sponsorship. It was fine. I that and what I had saved up, I would have been fine probably for like 6 months to a year. Even if nothing came in, thanks to all of that stuff. So it felt very safe and very stable. And even now, even um now I'm a single dad. It was different back then. Even now, it's still safe. Like the leads are coming in. I know exactly what I need to do if they aren't coming in. I've spent the last like 10 to 20 years reading books on business design, all this sort of stuff. I know what I'm doing. I'm very confident that I know what I'm doing. I know how to help clients. I know how to help people. So I'm I'm fine. I literally know it is daunting. It is scary when inquiries aren't coming in and stuff like that. But like I said, if I know what I would need to do if things did start to go downscale, and I haven't got there yet.
I know this is a tough decision for not only for you, Ian, but every single entrepreneur listening to this podcast. There is a point in your life when you have to take that step, and it scares the hell out of you, and it is really scary because most entrepreneurs would be their breadwinners at their house, and they are the only, they don't
Hmm.
have any backup. So I understand the complexities here, how tough it was for you to take that decision. I'm really sorry to hear about your mom, you losing your mom. I think losing a loved one itself is so challenging. It takes so much time to recover, come back into that right mindset to focus on things.
Mm,
So
mm.
kudos to you
Can
on.
I also share?
Yeah.
One of the other things that gave me some comfort was this exercise I think it's from Tim Ferriss in the 4 Hour Work Week. He does this thought exercise where if you sit down and work out what is the worst case scenario. So say hypothetically, you leave your job, no money comes in, everything's going bad, you can't pay your rent. What's the worst case scenario? What will happen to you? And in my case, I've got brothers and sisters. Worst case scenario, although they probably wouldn't like it, I could probably sleep on their sofa. Worst case scenario. And is that bad? I mean, it is, but it's not that bad. And that's like absolute worst case scenario. I will sleep on my sister's sofa. And that thinking like that and working out that absolute worst case scenario gives you comfort that in the event that if you did decide, yeah, I want to commit to this, and I think it's important to do these things because like I said, you don't want to get to like 70, 80 and regret not doing these things. Because I think you have to try these things, and you have to try and make a success of whatever dream or vision you have. And I think it's really good to have these thought exercises and to um picture what that scenario is. And you know s- in general, it's not that bad, and that's worst case scenario. And if it's something that you really, really want to do, you will make it work. No doubt. Like you will 100% make it work. And if that is, if you want to design logos, there's loads of work out there. I don't know what the numbers are now, but there's like 8 billion or whatever it is people out there. And there's like a good chunk of those people out of 8 billion are probably building businesses, planning things. There's loads of work. There's literally like I don't want to say an infinite supply of work, but there's a lot of work out there. And um, it's not that hard to get it if you want it.
Absolutely. I like what you shared, the worst case scenario thing by Tim Ferriss. I think it's a great way to release some of the anxiety and stress,
Mhm,
and to
mhm,
think things rationally and in a calm manner, because what's the worst could happen. So that's
mhm,
really super cool, and these are some great nuggets. I want to actually thank each and everybody who was listening to us, because we would be stepping into the logo design side, because I have some interesting questions which I want to ask Ian, which has been inspired from this book. Now,
mhm.
most of us know that what makes a good logo. I think there are countless amount of content which addresses this. It has to be versatile, it has to be simple, legible, distinct, memorable, it should differentiate, it should be appropriate, looks into the future, well executed. I'm positive all of you guys are aware of this. But I want to ask you a much more contextual question. So the question
Mhm.
is, does a logo or a concept idea, does it need to be original?
Okay, I really like this question, and one of the reasons why I thought a lot about this question is because I've got a friend. I'll call his name out. So Kaz, a friend of mine, Kaz. He constantly has this concern or stress that what he's designing has been done before, and it kind of paralyzes him, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he really stresses over originality, and I think a lot of designers do, and I think there's almost too much emphasis on this because especially especially when we think about simplicity. So if we're going to design a logo, a successful logo, it needs to be versatile, as you mentioned, and you want to create something that's going to work in every possible scenario. So large format print down to like social media size. So you're talking like 8 millimeters in width. So there's a lot of restraints, and to some degree, um, almost everything that can be done has probably been done before. There's books out there like Logo Modernism, which has like thousands of very simple designs out there. And there's literally millions of us out there, millions designing more and more symbol shapes and stuff like that. And um, so the vast supply of stuff out there is like ridiculous. So so the odds of you sitting down independently, drawing out ideas and putting them together, the odds of it being slightly similar to something that already exists is probably very high. Um, so that makes our job really difficult, especially if you are chasing this idea of creating something that hasn't existed previously, which is what Kaz keeps trying to do. Um, so, in terms of originality, I think a more a healthier way of looking at this is um, considering how that logo is actually going to be used in the landscape that you see it in. So, um, like realistically, a product or uh, y- uh, a shop or whatever, whatever this logo is going to be used on, it's not going to be directly compared with absolutely everything that's out there. It's going to be compared with the its competitors. So there is a landscape that that logo is going to be seen in. So in terms of differentiation, it's better to think of it in that way. And in the book, I used the example of Nike and Shaw deodorant. So Nike, we all know the Nike swoosh. And then if you look at Shaw deodorant, that actually has, a tick or a swoosh on it. And when you put them next to each other, conceptually, they're pretty much the same thing. Like they are both ticks. or almost to the point that if you put um the uh the Shaw swoosh on a trainer, you'd probably mistaken it for the Nike swoosh. They are so similar in that regard, they but there's no issue with that because um from a from an identification point of view, you would never see them in the same setting. Like one of them's on a deodorant can, the other one's on trainers, sports products, and stuff like that. Um, so there's that side of it, and then there's also the legal side of things. Um, so when we think of a logo, we're really talking about trademarks. So assuming that these things are registered as trademarks and actually used by companies, and when you register a logo as a trademark, um, it's these systems that they register into. It's not just a case of going, yeah, I want this logo protected everywhere. It doesn't work like that. You when you run them through the trademark registration process, they go into um specific categories. So there's a lot of different categories that you can choose, and the more categories that you want this logo to be registered in, the higher the cost. So if you was to go in and say, I want this logo to be protected in everything and in every country, the cost of that is going to be enormous. I have no idea what those costs are, but because of that, realistically, the average company will just pick the very specific categories that they want to um, protect their logo in, and because of that, um, you can actually have almost an identical looking design in a different category, if that makes sense. So you can have something that looks very similar. As long as it's not deemed confusingly similar, you don't have an issue with that. So I don't know if I'm making sense with this, but basically what I'm saying, or the gist of what I'm saying, is to not be so stressed about what you create looking similar to something you've seen. Obviously do your due diligence and make sure that you're checking on these trademark databases and stuff like that, just to make sure that you're not creating something that's a copy of something, because there's obviously copyright is different. So copyright protects something that's exactly the same. Trademark protection protects something that's confusingly similar. So as long as you are doing your due diligence, you don't need to stress as much as my friend does, because, like I said, as long as you're able to protect it, and as long as you're able to differentiate from the landscape, you don't need to stress as much as some people do about being original.
That's a lovely answer. So I think, just to summarize this, I think what you're trying to say is that there is no logo design concept or an idea which is actually original. I think it's just another version, or maybe a better or an enhanced version, or a unique version of an existing idea which came into existence. And to protect it, you have these legal structures in place,
Mhm.
classification. I think the categories which you're referring to as trademark classes. So, whichever
Yes,
category
correct,
the
correct.
company wants to dominate in, and I think there are around 45 classes, I think, if I'm not mistaken. You can choose categories where you want to dominate. So the deodorant example which you gave, so Nike exists in the marketplace. If the deodorant had something very similar, the only reason why both of them are able to exist in the marketplace is because both of them are dominating in different classes, and that's why they have something very identical, but they can still coexist. So as
Correct,
designers,
correct.
you should do your diligence, as Ian said. Have these these research these entities, do a trademark search. If you don't know how to do it, hire a lawyer who can do this for you. Just make
Mhm.
sure that you don't have anything which infringes on an existing mark. So that's lovely advice, Ian. I so appreciate you sharing that. Now, I want to ask you though, as
Sure.
designers, what do you think is the fundamental knowledge you believe every aspiring logo designer should possess, and how did that shape your own approach to this craft?
Um, that's a big question. You're asking so many big questions. Okay, so if I needed to sort of narrow this down to one, I think what really impacted me, and I'll give some background to it. So I've been a graphic designer for a long time, and when I started to get into logo design, I sort of started designing my own typography. And back then, um, I used to use a lot of grids, sort of drawing all the letters how I thought they should look, and uh, following a grid, trying to get like equal spacing and lining everything up perfectly. And for some reason, things didn't look quite right. But I did what I could to make it look right. And I was really lucky that, and this was around the time when my socials were doing well. I got contacted by, I won't mention his name because I got contacted by a designer who's quite well known, and he was asking for some advice for social medias because he hadn't, at that time he hadn't done any social media, so he was looking for someone to help and advise. And I ended up going for dinner with him, popped into London and met up with him, which was really cool. And I was showing him my portfolio, like it was, physical printed one. And he made this like side comment like, "Oh, you need to adjust the A." And I'm like, "What?" Like I really struggled to understand what he was talking about. Like he pointed out this A and he said, "Oh, if you leave it like that, you're not going to get hired because you've made X, Y, and Z error." And I could not see what he meant. Um, and he ended up getting out this book. So this book he pulled out is by Doyle Young. So there's some really fantastic typography books from this incredible designer and teacher called Doyle Young. So do check out his books; they're amazing. Um, and this guy taught me about optical adjustments, and he was showing me like things like overshoot and other things. And he didn't spend too long talking about it, but he kind of sent me down this rabbit hole, where I started sort of learning about like the relationships of shapes. And um I'll briefly explain what overshoot is. So if you was to draw a square, and then to the right of it draw a circle and have it mathematically precise so that they're both exactly the same height, the circle will look too small. Like if you remove any grid lines, that circle looks too small. Um, so in order for your eyes to make them look the same size, you have to make the circle slightly bigger. So you have to kind of overshoot it from the grid lines. Um, and by doing that, you can make the square and the circle look the same to our eyes, so optically. And there are like all these different optical illusions in typography, uh, which which you kind of really need to understand uh, when you're creating fonts, but also all that knowledge that you can learn in typography, and there's loads of it. You can apply that when designing symbols. So all these weird illusions that happen, like a radiation phenomenon. That's a really weird one. Like when you invert, so say if you've designed on white, when you invert the colors, the uh, our eyes make the white bits bigger. So you have to kind of compensate for all these weird little illusions. But if I was kind of really to pinpoint one thing that really opened my eyes to a lot of things and really improved my work, it's all the weird optical illusions in typography design. So if I was going to send a designer down a rabbit hole that wants to create symbols, go and learn how to design fonts, or sit down and open up y- you know uh, open up an A and then create the outlines and study it, draw lines, try and work out, like, because you'll draw grid lines over it, and you'll notice that, why doesn't that line up with that? Why doesn't that line up with that? Why is that slightly offset? There are lots of weird little things, and it's not accidental. It's all very intentional, and you see it in like all of the letters and everything. Like, there's so many like minor like optical illusions in typography. And if you open up really good logo designs, in my book, I used the to illustrate this, I used the Google G symbol. So
The
Google's got,
favicon, the Google favicon. Yes.
yeah, the Google favicon. When that came out, there was a couple of designers that were studying it, and they noticed it was wrong. So, by what I mean by wrong is they overlaid a circle, and then they noticed that the right hand side isn't, it doesn't follow the circle. And obviously, if you're an inexperienced designer, you just think, oh, they did it wrong. But actually, if you fix that mistake, you see why they changed it, because the right part of the G looks like it's sticking out too far, because it's got like that missing part. Um, because it's got that missing gap, the right part of the G, it just looks like it's hanging out too far. So to compensate for that, they tuck it in slightly. It's really interesting when you start to see these things, and you start to notice that, like, very pointy A's are like slightly bigger than letters that are flat, and O's are slightly larger and stuff like that. There's all these, really small things. And like I said, if you find very well designed logos, so from the likes of like Pentagram, or if you go back to like work from like Sal Bass and um Paul Rand and stuff like that. If you look at their stuff, they factor in all of these weird illusions and stuff like that, and it's you can really learn a lot from understanding that's there, and then actually observing it and really studying it. And what I mean by like, draw over these things and try and work it out. You will learn more that way than reading any book.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on this typography. Learning typography or learning how to make fonts, these things can be very effective to optically view a shape or a
Mhm,
symbol which you're trying to create, just to make sure that it's aligned or structured in the right way. So that's some
mhm,
great tip, Ian, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I would highly encourage people to also read and go through, the way I did it, Ian, because I was in a position that, I was bankrupt, and I did not had much resources or money to actually learn design or learn more about logo design. So what I did
mhm,
was I started recreating logos by all those famous designers which you
mhm.
said, and in the process I just visually started to just understand that, oh, it has to be done this way, otherwise it does not look right. So
Mhm.
subconsciously or unconsciously, whatever, it just became a part of my DNA. So I appreciate you sharing that great tip. Thank you so much. I want to ask you, my other question is that, in the when we start off as designers, we get into the pursuit of creating interesting concepts, design, logos, and all these elements. and eventually you reach a point that you need to have something a little more. So I read this excerpt, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, from your book,
Mm.
and you say that sell a process but not a
Mhm.
logo. And I want you to just highlight what do you mean by this. And I also want to just
Sure.
add on and say that I have noticed many designers, because they want to appear intelligent in front of their clients and be smart, they come up with this interesting ways, process, systems, strategies, and eventually they reach a point that I've seen many designers losing interest in design, and they stick to selling those processes, strategies, and structure. I wanted to get your take on that too.
Sure. Okay, so why I really stress that is, and I explain this to my clients when I first speak to them, that if you search on Google and you start looking for a logo or a logo designer, you're going to notice that the price of them very significantly. Like you will literally see that you can get a logo for a couple of dollars, and then you can see that there are companies out there that literally spend hundreds of millions of dollars or pounds on a logo, and literally only a logo. Like that's literally the final product. And it's it can be hard to comprehend why that is, because the final product in every case, from $5 up into $1 million, is a logo. Like it's exactly the same end product. So are people buying a logo? And um yes, that's the end product, but what the client's paying for is not the logo. They are paying for the process, they're paying for the service, they're paying for the expertise. And I always make that really clear to my clients that when they hire me, they're not buying a logo, they're buying the process, the service, the expertise, and so on for that. So when it comes around to selling, that's what you're selling. You're not selling a logo. The logo is the byproduct of what they're paying for. So first of all, that gets the client's head to understand the difference between the cheap options, because there's literally, like, logo design is a really weird thing where the ceiling to the price is pretty much infinite. uh because really, when you consider at the higher end, something like, say, Coca-Cola. If Coca-Cola was to rebrand, Coca-Cola wouldn't just redesign their logo, they would rebrand, they would change everything. If they was to get that wrong, what's the cost of that being wrong? So they have to get it right at that higher level, and because they have to get it right, they want the comfort and security to hire the least risky option. And if that means paying somebody 100 million to get it right and to make sure that it's right, they would pay that, because if they was to get it wrong and it to fail, the cost would be greater than that, because it's so big. That's why it can get ridiculous um, money. Um, but anyway, yeah. So what I was saying, so in terms of selling, it's really important to sell how you work, sell your process, sell your how it what it looks like to actually work with you. So hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I also want you to address the other part of the question which I asked. I've realized that once you become so accustomed to these processes, or once you
Hmm.
create these systems in place, wherein you're not just designing but you're also helping them from the strategic side of things, which I think you
Hmm.
also do, I also do,
Yes.
and many other
Yeah.
designers who are listening to this podcast does also offer. There can be a point wherein you find the strategic side of things to be more interesting as designers, because that helps you to position yourself to be smart. And over the course of time, I've seen some designers, at least in my circle, who have dropped the idea of designing things, and they
Mm.
purely focus on just the process and the systems and creating those things. What is your take? Do you think you would reach a certain point wherein you might let go of your design expertise and maybe just stick to just developing processes because that helps you to acquire more money? What do you think? Like, I just want to get your perspective. I'm not trying to put you on the limelight or
Yeah,
spotlight.
sure. I mean, it's an interesting question, and if we're focusing specifically on logo design, creating a logo isn't hard. Like actually creating the artwork for a logo is very simple. So when people start getting scared about AI, and it's like people get scared about AI, and it's like, well, that actual part of it that AI can do is not really that complicated. What is complicated is finding the right solution. And there's obviously a lot of thought and strategy and stuff that goes into that. Would I ever go all in on that direction? Possibly. Um, Not right now. I enjoy the design side of things. Um, but yes, the strategy in finding the right solution, and the processes and designing all of that stuff, that is definitely interesting, and I could see myself going down that route. Like I'm enjoying writing a lot now. I've just released this book. It's not going to be my last. I've got a lot more ideas. Like I've got the bug for it, um, which is interesting because I at least at school I was told I was dyslexic, and I never read that much. But yeah, it's interesting how these things change. So to answer your question, yeah, maybe I can see that could potentially happen, but right here, right now, I like the design side of thing too. And I kind of brushed on the AI thing, and in a way, in the way that these AI systems are going, uh, if they keep progressing at the speed that they are, we might be able to just have the idea in our head, and AI just find the best execution of it. So the actual thinking and the strategy side, and the sort of more businessy side, that's obviously a more valuable thing anyway than the actual than actually physically putting the artwork together.
Absolutely, and absolutely. I just have a few more questions. So why don't we take a break? And anybody who is listening in the audience, if you'd like to come up, raise your hand. This is the time. We would open up the stage for Q&A. If you'd like to ask Ian any specific question about logo design, his process, anything you like to ask him, do not hesitate. I'm going to play an ad. Thank you so much to my sponsor, Carla Howard, for sponsoring this specific episode. So let me just play the ad.
Are you a professional speaker who's frustrated because you're not getting paid for the value you deliver? If so, the Get Paid from the Stage program was created for you. During our 6 weeks together, you will build the framework for your speaker business. You'll create an amazing speaker package that event organizers are going to take notice of. And I will walk you through the sweet spot for pricing and many other things that are going to make you referable so that you can earn the high dollar value that I know you're delivering. Be sure to sign up soon. Our next cohort begins March 2nd, and it's limited to no more than 10 people. Send me a note and let me know that you heard about the program from Jason's podcast to get your free 1-hour consultation with me at no extra charge. I can't wait to see you get paid from the stage.
So again, that's Carla Howard. She's a strategic a change consultant, professional speaker, dream enabler, and she's doing this 6 week Get Paid from Stage program, which I think it kicks off on March 2nd, 2024. If you're interested, I have the registration link under the show notes. Even in the event notes, you should be able to find it. So back into our discussion, Ian. So my next question, which I want to like to ask you, is related to briefs. So I was going through a lot of section from your book. I want to ask you, how do you approach creating a design brief for your logo
Sure,
projects, and what
sure.
key elements do you include to ensure it's effective and helps you through executing it?
Sure. Okay. So, we not long ago had a conversation about selling a process, not a logo.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of my process, I describe it as a goal-based design process. So rather than simply, take a company name and start coming up with ideas, what I do is I work with my client initially to create a list of goals, and that's something that I use almost like a tick list to reference back through when designing logos and when presenting, and when it comes around to narrowing all the ideas down into one particular direction. So how I do this is I have a list of questions essentially that are broken down into three areas. So this goes into, first of all, like who they are as a business and what makes them special. I look at who they are directly competing with, and that's particularly important so that you can differentiate from what's out there. So that we're in that case we're referencing back to all that originality stuff. We need to know who is this logo or who is this company going to be compared with. And then we also want to look into who are they wanting to attract? So who's their ideal, who is their target audience? Who is their ideal customer? So I've got lots of questions that break down those three different areas. But then there's also a third area which I make sure to understand, and it's personal preference. And it's it's a funny one really, because when it comes to logo design or identity design, personal preference is irrelevant. So in reality, in reality, as designers, we don't really care what the client's personal preferences or expectations are, because in reality, if you're designing a solution based on the company goals and stuff, that personal preferences, it's irrelevant. But but they are hiring you, and they are approaching you, and they are the people that are going to be signing off what you do. So I feel it beneficial to understand what their expectations are, if they have any preferences, if there's certain things that they're expecting to see. So I've got questions that I ask that also help me to understand sort of how they picture their business, what they are expecting to see, what they're, So I'm not asking them questions like, "What do you want?" It's very carefully written questions, something like, "Are there any brands or companies that capture a similar look and feel that you're aiming for?" So y- you know if, for example, they come back to me and say that uh they resonate with like Apple and Nike and these sort of brands, it helps me to understand, okay, they have a preference for minimal and simplicity. So if I design something that's minimal and simple, they would probably sign it off. um but also those questions are quite interesting because sometimes, they throw in curveballs, and it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that they imagine it in that way. So, if those curveballs do come up, you can have a conversation and you can go, oh, that's interesting. You picture yourself looking more like this. What's the reason for that? And you can kind of dig into it once you sort of get a feel for that. But like I said, even though those personal preferences are kind of irrelevant, it's useful to understand, and then you can kind of take that and all the sort of the more strategy based stuff, and you can design something that's going to work, but also that that's going to be signed off. And I also think it's really important because you have to put yourself in your client's shoes. These are people that, especially if you work with the founders of the company, they've had got this dream for probably years, and usually when I work with them, it's not their first logo. Usually it's their second or their like forever logo. So we're turning them into like a real company. So they usually have like dreams and goals and ambitions. So I think it's really important to hear them out. Like, what do they expect this to look like? What's their kind of dream for how this could be? So I put a lot of emphasis on that. Those expectations and stuff. But yeah. So what I then do is I actually send a questionnaire, and I know there's a lot of designers that hate questionnaires, but I found it to work for me, and I started off using questionnaires primarily because when I had started my business, it was on the side of a full-time job. So the idea of having these like strategy-based calls and these in-depth conversations and stuff like that just wasn't feasible. But what I do now is do a questionnaire and a conversation, and then we kind of get everything all out in the air. And then what I do is I take the questionnaire responses and any other notes, and I turn that into a tick list of goals. And it's really important that you get that signed off by the client. And why this is because logo design is very, very easy to look at like it's art. So when it comes round to presenting, if you don't lay the foundations, your client's going to look at it in a very subjective way, almost like they're looking at a beautiful picture. But what we need to do is steer them away from thinking like that from the very beginning. So what I do is through my process, I really stress that we want to look at everything as objectively and as measurable as possible. So by preparing these goals, I'm laying the foundation for that, and I explain to them exactly why we're doing this, and it's so that everybody from the outset is all working towards the same eventual outcome, and that we have these goals that we can reference back to, and by getting it signed off from the beginning, we're kind of laying down the foundations for that from the very outset. But also, say if hypothetically, um, you came round to presenting logos and they suddenly had a different vision because you have these goals that you're referencing to and they've been signed off. If in the event, and it's rarely happened to me, if in the event that they do change the direction, or somebody else comes in and starts interjecting, a different vision or whatever, it gives you the ground to like put your foot down and explain that, what we're trying to do is this, this, and this. And if you end up needing to start the process again, you can justify increasing costs. And it keeps you really in control, and it keeps everything very focused on being very objective and measurable. And I've found it just to be a process that's worked really well for me.
You know, Ian, I agree with you 100% on this. It's important that designers, before executing or jumping into, because we all love the fact that, oh, let's create something, let's start sketching. We all want to jump into this, but having a clear idea or a clear goal as to what you want to achieve, having that listed down, it is highly effective, because nobody likes unnecessary revisions and nobody likes to waste time on it.
Mhm.
So that really helps, so I, from what I'm getting from this conversation is that spend time initially to get a good brief. Okay, at
Correct.
least a very good
And
understanding of.
always take the lead. Always take the lead like, even if the client comes to you with a nicely prepared brief, take the lead every time. Because I see so many like young designers expecting the client to send a brief. They don't send a brief. That doesn't happen. What happens is they come to you and go, "Oh, I need a logo or an identity." They don't know what the process looks like. They've never done, well, most people that I work with, they haven't done this before. They don't know where to start. They're what they're interested in is making X, Y, and Z product. That's the thing that, kind of fuels them and makes them excited. As for like a logo design they don't know. Like, some do. Obviously you will get clients. I've got one now that's for a really really nice brief. I haven't had one like that in a long time. But that scenario is so incredibly rare. So it's really important to just assume that it's your responsibility to create that project brief. So every project, it doesn't matter who it is, take responsibility of that, and take charge, because clients come to you to solve this problem. Take the lead and tell them the way it's going to be.
That is such a lovely advice, Ian. I totally agree with you. Now, since you mentioned about your process related to brief, I think you have a 6 step design process. That's what I recollect from your book. Would you
Yes.
mind taking our listeners and our audience through those 6 steps, maybe giving us a little overview of what those 6 stages look like?
Yeah, sure. So step number one, we've already pretty much discussed that through this conversation. So in terms of where I start, I always start with goal creation. So I always work out I always basically create a brief initially. And once those goals, that list of goals has been signed off, my goal after that is to find the most effective solution based on that. So in the book, I've laid it down in like a almost like a, this is step one, step two, step three. In reality, it's kind of really all over the place. And I think everyone is like that. But a typical process, just to, make it easier to follow. So I'd start by creating the goals for the project. And then what I will then start doing is to explore ideas. And um, with logo design, the hardest thing is to find a good idea. Once you found a good idea, creating the artwork, that's the easy bit. So what you need is to have a good idea. And in the book, I do break down all these different exercises that I try, but typical thing, typically I do almost on every project. I really like word mapping. I find that really useful. Um, so as an example, earlier today, I started on a logo for this electrical installation company, and they specifically requested that they don't want to use any of the stereotypical stuff related to electricity. So typical things like lightning bulbs and plugs and all this sort of stuff. So with this, using the word mapping, it's a really useful exercise to start thinking of areas outside of the box and different directions, without having to actually start drawing any logos. It's useful to like get a thesaurus out and start looking at words and associations to different areas to really explore. But to expand on this, basically, I sit down for a few hours sketching in a sketchbook. I always sketch on paper. I really stress that I feel it's really important that you do actually physically sketch on paper. And why I say this is because when you start working in a computer, you are working with very precise shapes and lines. When you are working in a sketchbook, if you work in the way that I do, you scribble. So I think some young designers in particular get too hooked up on having to draw perfectly, but literally I scribble so fast. Sometimes what happens is I will draw an idea, but I draw it so badly wrong or overlap something that I get what would be described as like a happy accident, that you end up coming up with a new idea that you wouldn't have thought of because your pen slipped. So I think it's and this happens a lot for me. Like the amount of times I've like started scribbling down an idea and then I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, this is a really cool idea. And if I sat down and thought in my head and just focused on thinking rather than thinking out loud with a pencil, you end up coming up with just sometimes just completely different ideas to what was in your head. So yeah, I basically spend hours sketching. My focus is really finding a strong idea or a strong concept, and then what I do is I then take those ideas and develop them on the computer. Interestingly, in the book, my process is slightly changing, so I probably need to update the book at some point. Um, so once I've got good ideas, I then start developing them on the computer, and I start to build a presentation essentially. And my process has been changing over the past year. So my more traditional thing to do has been to prepare multiple options. So usually on average it would be three, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's four. But on average, my with my old process, I would prepare a presentation, and how this would look is um I would present each design individually, so like the logo on a white background. I would usually position a smaller version of that in the bottom right hand corner, and that's so that my clients can see that it's very versatile. If there's different configurations of that logo or different lockups of that logo, I will show that on following slides. But one of the most important things, and I really stress this, nobody ever sees a logo on a white background how you're presenting it. Like that's a really really weird way of seeing a logo. So what you need to do is help your client visualize how this is going to look in the real world. So find really great mock-ups that are relevant to the industry and just start to display the logo at a range of sizes. So I usually start big, so maybe like an exhibition stand, and then I'll gradually go down in size to maybe like stationery or vehicle graphics, and then I'll gradually go down in size. And at the smaller size, maybe it will be maybe like on a pen or an app icon or something like this. And what I'm trying to do is show them how versatile this solution is and help them to visualize how this is going to look in the real world. And if I'm presenting options, I'll do the exact same thing for each logo, same mockups, and then I do a summary at the end. Now,
Would this
as
be
that
a full-fledged identity, Ian, or are you just demonstrating logos?
I tend to, well, generally my kind of my main product is logo design. So when people come to me, we are focusing primarily on a logo. But I do sometimes, start to flesh like an identity together. Like I had a client recently. Um, I don't know if they protected it yet, so I won't mention the name. But basically, they had this they have this name for their company, which is based on a scar. Um, and they're creating this fashion brand based on this word, and they obviously hired me to create the logo for it, and we created something really cool. But while I was working on it, I kept having all these ideas for what they could do. So, like with almost like tagline and other things. So within the presentation, I started sort of mocking up how like the business cards would look with maybe some taglines and things. So I do start sometimes playing around with it, um, just to help talk through some ideas. But the main focus is the logo itself. Um, so yeah, going back to how I present. So my more traditional way is presenting options, then I'll do a summary at the end. So that's how I've been doing it for years. But how I've been um exploring over the last year, and I will probably go fully all in this year on this, is I have now started to present what I feel is the solution. So I'm presenting. I don't want to say I'm presenting one logo because that's not true. um, I'm doing a presentation that builds up to what I feel is the solution. And I think I did briefly describe that in the book. Can't remember if I think I did. But basically, how this works is same process, but something that I've noticed is that pretty much 9 out of 10 times when I design options, there is always one that is stronger. And when I present the options at the end, when I do the summary, I always end up putting more emphasis on one anyway, and they tend to end up going with that one anyway. So what I started doing is presenting a journey that builds up to one. Um, and this it's better. It's a much better process, but also I've got to the point now where I can generally hone down on the idea quite quickly, and I can see when ideas just don't work and when certain other directions do work, and I can usually see that almost when it's a a sketch. So doing this, I don't waste as much time like trying to get ideas working that I know aren't as strong as others, and it means that I can put more focus on um finding the best execution of the best idea. Because usually you can tell which like general concept or raw idea is the strongest, and then it's just a case of finding the best execution of that. So what I've been doing, and it hasn't always worked, but it's worked in 9 out of 10 times. um i will I will put together a presentation that shares a journey, and I do share sketches, and I do share other concepts and directions that I was exploring. So I do still show other ideas, but like I said, it eventually builds up to this one direction, and um I'm narrowing it down, show this one, and then show all the mock-ups and stuff like that, and then at the end it's got the logo on its own. But basically what I'm doing is, by sharing a story, I'm taking them on that journey, and getting them hyped up and excited, and because of that, it works. It's worked in pretty much every case, and it's been more successful. So at some point I would go all in on that direction, and I think where it's not worked is because there has been this expectation that they are expecting options. Because on my website, that's what I'm selling, and um all through the process, there's this kind of general expectation that they're going to see more than one logo. So I need to fix that. But at some point, I'm going to go all in on this one logo, one concept route.
Wow.
So
I,
this
I, I personally feel, Ian,
I can keep going.
I personally feel that all designers should focus on the presentation piece, because that actually, and if you show a journey, as you said, uh, your entire process, the entire journey of how you came to this idea, this concept, and if you can articulate your thoughts and present it well, I think most clients understand it. I follow the same thing, Ian. So I am happy that you're leaning on to that direction, and you should. I think you're much more experienced in comparison to me, and I
I,
think
I
you.
I feel like I know what I'm doing now. Like I've been reluctant to kind of go all in on it, because it's like, well, if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to present one, first of all, just so that it's clear, presenting one doesn't mean less work. You still need to like do a whole load of groundwork to get to that. But if I'm going to present the one, I need to be 100% sure that what I'm showing is the solution. And it's not always easy to um get to that point, especially when you got multiple projects on the go and you got lots going on. Like something I find is I set aside time in my diary to get projects done, and sometimes you get that perfect solution really easily, like that one that I described that's based on a scar. That came together really quickly. Like I probably only spent a few hours on that whole presentation, and they signed it off really quickly. And then some other times I can be spending days, and I get to this solution where I'm not quite happy, and that's why it's why my process keeps changing. And sometimes what I have been doing is when I've got a lot on the go, sometimes I'm like, "Oh, really should get back to that client, because I feel really bad that I haven't done anything on their project yet, and I really need to push that forward." So there have been occasions where I've actually presented sketches, and I've actually done a whole presentation where I'm presenting different directions that I've been exploring, and I share my general thought process. And what my client doesn't always know is that when I'm doing that, it's because I'm kind of trying to put something together as quickly as I can. But it's actually worked quite well with some clients to do that. So when we talk about process, I do keep playing with my process all the time, and trying things and experimenting with things, and really trying to just see um see what works really well. And sometimes sharing sketches and sharing directions does work with the right customers. Sometimes presenting just one work for some customers, and sometimes presenting like three or four work for some customers. So um I haven't fully committed on any one direction, and it might just end up being the case that I will just keep trying different things, because to be honest, every client is different. I've worked with some clients where I know, like with that scar one, I know that they trusted me so much. I know whatever I present to them, they would go ahead with. So because of that, I really wanted to make sure that what I share with them is the right solution. So in that case, I didn't do so much of the journey like I have done with some clients. It's I keep playing and exploring. And like I said, that I know sometimes I have clients and I know that they want to see multiple things. So in those cases, I show multiple things. So um, there is no linear step by step process, but um, maybe all these different things that I'm playing with will eventually cement into one single thing. We'll see. We'll see. I'll keep you posted.
I think, everyone's process keeps evolving, Ian, right? Wouldn't you agree with me? Because when you start, you may only require so much, but as you grow, you keep learning more and more things. And I think your process keeps evolving day in and day out. And sometimes, the silliest of things can make a lot of sense. For an example, when I used to do scheduling for my guests, I used to invite them to be a guest on my show, and I used to send these Calendly invites, which usually have some general questions, which you also answered, right? And
Mhm.
one of those questions used to be like, "How did you hear about my show?" And and I think one of my guests, and if I'm not mistaken, that is Philip Van Dusen. He
Mhm.
he was unable to answer it because he was like, "You invited me," and I was thinking like, "Oh, you know what? I should have an option, a checkbox which states the host invited me to be a guest on the show." Because that's logical, right? I never thought of it. It
Mhm.
strikes. So I think the process keeps evolving. I think it's a lovely answer. I want to ask you just a few more things, and we'll wrap up today's
Sure, of
interview as
course.
quickly as possible.
Happy to keep going. Don't worry, it's fine.
All
Take
right.
as long as you want.
Okay. So I want to, and I always ask this question to all my guests. Okay. The thing is, I want to know, Ian, what is that one thing you want to be remembered for? What kind of a legacy you want to leave for people? Do you want to be the guy who wants to be the logo designer? Do you want to be the podcaster? What exactly do you want to be remembered for?
Um, you do like your hard questions, and so that everyone listening knows, you did prepare me, but I find this one really hard. Um, I'd rather be remembered for being a good dad than a good designer, because I think that's more important.
That is
So,
lovely.
well, I think I'll expand on this. So something I have a real issue with in general across the design space, across the entrepreneurial space, is there is this real focus for like work, and just constantly working all the time and really pushing and chasing for money and like trying to earn as much as possible and like all the content around charging like $50,000 for a logo and all this stuff. And I know money's important and you need money to have a roof over your head and all this sort of stuff. But one of the reasons why I specifically said title my book "Make a Living" is because it's not about making huge amounts of money. It's more about actually building a life around this. Um, so yeah, in terms of like the legacy thing, obviously it would be nice to be remembered for doing good work and um I'd hope that people see me as someone that was honest and truthful and um all that sort of stuff. But what's important to me is, making sure that I'm there for my little one and um brought her up well and all this sort of stuff. So for me, that's in terms of legacy, I I think that's more important than, than work. Um, work's a means to an end, and it's nice to be able to do good stuff, and it's nice to be successful. But something that's quite interesting. I've always been a big goal setter, and um, surprisingly kind of I forgot where I wanted to be, which is well, I mean, I nearly where I wanted to be. Like when I set out on this quest of like designing logos, I wanted to be in a certain place with it and working with certain clients, and like now I'm working with a lot of big universities on projects, which is surreal. And I've just released a book, and I've got like a podcast, and if you search on Google, I come up and um, kind of like a design celebrity. I know that sounds weird saying that myself, but it, it
You are,
but
you
but
are.
but the reality of it is it's very like I've wanted to write a book for years, and now I've done it. It's like, oh, I've done it. And it's like you kind of picture in your head of what it's going to be like when that happens, but when it actually happens, it's not that what am I trying to say? It's not what you think it's going to be. And interestingly, being on the other side of that, so being the person inside that box rather than watching from an outside point of view, it looks amazing. It's like, oh wow, they're like up there. But in reality, it's like nothing really changes. And it's like you're kind of chasing all these things. So it it makes me quite thoughtful as like what's actually important. And um having a book and having like this authority and this reputation and all this sort of stuff, that's like a means to an end. Like that should be to make sure that you've got a roof over your head, and um that you can put the heating on and that you can eat and all this sort of stuff, and that you're like debt free or whatever. That's that's what work should be for. What really matters is um family and things that makes you happy and stuff like that. It's I don't know where I'm going with this, but hopefully you get the idea. Work and stuff, yes, obviously leaving a legacy I think is important, but what's more important, I'd much rather, if when I'm not here, know that my daughter knew that I was there for her and that I did all that I could for her. So for me, that's more important than any legacy I leave behind in terms of work.
That
That's a
is
deep answer.
incredibly that is incredibly, and that displays, some, if you think about it, Ian, like, people actually conclude that you're an authority and you have done this, you have written a book, you have so many followers, you have a community on Facebook, all these accomplishments. But I think people tend to not really focus on the journey too much. They only see the end result, right? Think about
Mhm.
it. Like, you have been slogging your ass, okay? And don't take me
Yeah,
wrong, I say
all these things,
all these
it's really
years.
interesting. Yeah,
Like,
all these things kind of fall into place. And what really fascinates me is I have friends that, and Izzy's a good example. She'll say something like, "Oh, I'm not at your level." It's like, what does that even mean? I do know what it means, but it's really fascinating, and it's, I guess it's branding, personal branding. That you do all these things and they accumulate, and you get this compound effect. And as an outsider, when an outsider sees all these things and all these people that you're associated with and all these things that you do over that time, it creates this like box in people's brains. And it really fascinates, like it really fascinates me, because it really is like an illusion. And people perceive you in a certain way because of that. But when you're the person inside it, you don't really notice it. And Izzy's a good example, because she's been like hosting on Adobe, and like she says, like, I'm not at your level. And it's like, but you're working with Adobe. That's like higher than what I'm doing. And like people don't realize that. Um, and again, I don't know where I'm going with this, but people don't really realize that um that idea of level and um, seeing yourself at a certain level, it's very abstract, and it doesn't really exist. It's very much an illusion. And um, I feel like I should write a book about that. Because it does like personal branding versus like company branding. It really is like an illusion, and it really fascinates me how you can create this illusion that you're somebody that's like at the top of your game, when in reality it's just an accumulation of associations with people, and um, doing all these different things like daily, all these micro things on a daily basis, and it's fascinating how it builds up.
Absolutely, Ian. That is incredible. I want to ask you something about your podcast, though. I know you have
Sure.
been doing it for quite a long time. Okay, you have interviewed n number of people, and I totally respect the people who have been a guest on your show.
Hmm.
Do you remember any specific episode which was so memorable that kind of influenced you on your perspective on logo design or getting into this game? Any specific interview?
Um, one that comes to mind is Sagi Haviv.
Such an
Um,
incredible
it's
guy. I think I have heard this episode. Go ahead.
yeah, it's quite an old one now. Um, but I've listened back to it a few times, and it's quite weird when you've done the interview, but you listen back to it because you can't remember having that conversation. But it really fascinates me how they present work and how they establish authority and take lead. And I really like um, how when they present, they say something along the lines of "It's never love at first sight," and I think that's really interesting because it's and interestingly, I haven't added it to my own process, and I probably should. But it's interesting because it's very easy with logo design to see something very simple and minimal and immediately think, "I don't like it." And I've done that myself with stuff when I've seen work. Um, so it's true that it's with logo design in particular that you don't that there's this expectation, well, clients have this expectation that when you present something, they're going to be like, "Oh, wow, this is what I dreamt of." When in reality, if you do it right, it's going to be something very simple and different from what's been done before. So there's never going to be that immediate, like, that wow moment. And I think how they present and how they take lead on things is um, fascinating, and um, it's difficult because you can't just get to that. um, like a student couldn't present it in the same way as Chemaev and Gazmar and Harry because they've built up all this credibility and this reputation over the years, and that's come from like Tom and Ivan. But obviously, Sagi, he joined them when Steph Geisberler, I think that's how you pronounce his name, when he worked there. So Steph's been there a long time, but he's got that same authority as like Tom and Ivan does now, and it just everything about Chamath Geisman, it really fascinates me how they've really established this like authority, and they've got so much trust, so much credibility that they could probably present anything and it would probably get signed off. That's how much credibility they
I
got.
would argue with you on that. I think what I like about CGA, Shamaev, Heisman, and Haviv, and I have noticed this on their interviews. They say that no matter what happens, whether you like it or not, we would present you the very best solution, and this is going to
Hmm.
be ideal. And
Yes.
I like to actually bring up a point because you highlighted something earlier when we were speaking about presentations that I want to offer them one specific solution. I want to make everything around it a journey and all those things. I remember
Hmm.
specifically on one of those videos, I don't know if it was by Haviv or the other partners, but they said when you give options to your clients to choose, what if they end up choosing the one which you don't really like or which you feel is not really ideal? It's gonna end up being in your books, it's gonna be on your
Hmm.
website, and you have to live with it for the rest of your life. So if you keep that concept, if you if you understand the analogy, that means they don't want anything which wouldn't be ideal. And that is a level of dedication, I think, if you were to put in. And I think, Ian, with dedication, anything is achievable. So maybe at some point, if you still continue to have the same dedication, this is what I personally feel, that you might reach that stage. And that doesn't just apply to you. I think anybody who's listening to this specific episode, I think if you put in that work and that level of detail, attention, and dedication, I think eventually it compounds, as you say, and it eventually pays off. So
It
don't
does. It
undervalue
does.
yourself.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of any agency out there, I admire uh, Tom and Ivan. I think what they built is amazing, and like I know Ivan in particular, who sadly passed away. He's someone who will always say, "Is this good enough to be put in a book?" So when they're creating the work, and I think that's a really good way of uh, thinking about stuff. You know, it really pushes you to do better work. So I know that I say that the most impactful one was probably with Sagi. I have spoken to Tom directly as well. Um, but yeah, it's just the agency in general. It really fascinates me. Like I did an interview as well with Steph Geisberler. I think that's how you say it. He used to work for them as well. Um, and of all agencies in the world, they're the one that really uh fascinates me. And it would be nice, in terms of like long-term plan to have something like that. You know what they've got, and sort of be where they are one day. Um, Yeah, I'm rambling now.
Ian, that is possible. Don't lose hope, my friend. I am positive it's gonna happen. Let's do some rapid fire, and we will wrap things up. So I have some interesting questions which I want to ask you as a part of the rapid fire questions, Ian. And I'll try
Okay.
to be quick. If you could redesign any famous logo in this world, which according to you sucks, which one it would be and why?
I would probably say the Spotify logo
You don't
because it
like
sucks.
the Spotify logo?
No.
Okay. Okay. Any specific reason why you don't like it?
Oh, sorry. I thought when you said rapid fire that you would I have to just give an answer and not explain it. So I know if anyone at the team is listening to me right now, I'm really sorry. Um, if you look at the Spotify logo, it nothing lines up on it, and it really annoys me, that wave. And I know why it's like that, and I know why they've had to keep it like that, and it's due to like the trademark protection and all this sort of stuff. But it bugs the hell out of me, and I would really love to explore that and redesign that symbol, even if it's just a case of just fixing the alignment on it. It's bugged the hell out of me for years, and it needs a redesign.
All right, but I appreciate you sharing. And people on Spotify, if you're listening to it, please reach out to Ian and let's see if we can optically make it better. Okay, okay. So when you got into logo design, there are certain logos which kind of inspire you to get into branding. Do you remember back in time, was there a specific logo you loved and which really, pushed you to get into branding because they had like super cool identity? To give you an example, like for when I was working back in the days, years back, I used to work for a company called Three, and Three used to be a telecom. I think it was in UK
Hmm.
also, and they
Hmm.
later on, I think they were bought by Vodafone, stuff like that. So they used to have this
Hmm.
unique identity, and we used to have this in our office. They used to, like how MTV used to do it. They used to create characters out of the logo. Just Google this, guys. So I fell in love with this identity system which they had created, and I know what Marty Neumeyer says, that it's in your gut, like you feel it in your gut. I used to feel
Hmm.
that I used to love being associated with everything they create. So was there any specific company logos out there which kind of spoke to you and said, branding is where you have to head, Ian? Let's make some logos, let's create some identities, stuff like that. Do you remember?
Now you phrase the question like that, it's different to what I noted down. Um, Interestingly, the the three logo, who designed that? I said I went for dinner with a designer and they taught me stuff. It was the person that designed that.
Wow.
Um, so I find that a really hard question to answer quickly. In terms of a logo that's always striked me as fascinating, that I've always thought, wow, that's clever. Um, is the My Fonts logo. I've always thought that's really clever. Um, so when I first saw that, I just thought it was like a handwritten My with fonts next to it, and I never really thought anything of it. And it was when I saw somewhere that it's a hand reaching out to the fonts, I'm like, huh? Huh? And I remember just realizing, well, that's really clever. And I've always really liked those clever uh little things in logos, and although when you consider it, like, the purpose of a logo is really to identify, so those quirky little things don't really matter, like the hidden arrow in the FedEx and the bear in the Toblerone and all these different things. I really like those things. I remember that My Fonts one. It I didn't notice it at all when I first saw it, and I like I said, I just thought it was like a script font next to like a normal font. But when I noticed that it's a hand, it really, it was like, oh, that's clever. I like that. Um, it wasn't the first one that got me fascinated with logos. But it's definitely one that comes to mind when you ask that question.
That is a super cool logo. In fact, I also just noticed it, and I think it is super, super clever. Guys, if you
Once
were,
you notice it, it's like, oh, that's clever.
yeah, that is very clever because it has the M and the Y, and it does definitely look
Correct,
like
but
a
it
hand.
looks like a
Yeah,
hand reaching out to the fonts, which is quite clever.
that is super cool. So, if any of the logos which you have designed, Ian, if any of these logos did get the ability to talk to you, what do you think they would say about your design style?
I don't know. um, it's interesting because I always try to design logos that fulfill the brief, but I have had people point out that they can tell when something's like I mean this is when I'm working within a team, so they can tell from the three people who designed it. So I obviously do have a style without meaning to. Um I'd like to think that what I do is clean and minimal. I don't know. I try to do the best I can. It's it's funny with design because generally my memory of the work that I do isn't particularly very good, and then I see it like a year later, and it's like, oh, actually, that works quite good. um, yeah, I don't know. I'm rambling now, but yeah, I'd hope that they will be minimal and versatile. I don't know. Hard question.
That's all right, Ian. That's all right. So I want to thank Ian for extending our interview time. I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes, I guess.
It's
But
fine, no worries.
but I
It's been fun.
appreciate, Ian, all the golden nuggets which you have shared during this interview. I think it was a phenomenal episode. I got to know a lot more about logo design in general. I was able to learn,
Good, good.
know more about you as an individual. I think we're gonna have like a nice long term relationship, a nice friendly one.
Absolutely.
And if you want our listeners with one thing they can take away from this whole conversation, what would that be?
You do like your hard questions. I think probably the most important thing from this discussion in relation to logo design has been the conversation around the optical adjustments. So if you are wanting to be a good logo designer, please learn typography design. If you learn typography design, then your designs in general will get better. And the other thing is, if you don't have my book, buy my book and write a review on Amazon, please. Thank you.
Do you have any speaking engagements or any podcast appearance lined up you would like to promote on my show, Ian?
I don't actually. At the moment, I don't have anything. Oh yes, I do. I'm doing a live thing in March, but I don't have any details for it right now. But what I'm going to be doing is a 40-minute virtual presentation to a college, which I'm excited about, and I am potentially going to be doing some in-person stuff and facing my fear of public speaking this year. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I don't know the details yet, but I'm having those conversations and just talking about it now, I feel sick. I don't know why I'm agreeing to do it, but yeah, here we are.
All
Face your
right.
fears and all that
I wish you luck, and I hope things go well. I know you will crush it. If not, we can
If
keep
not, I'll
trying.
just have a
It's okay.
panic attack on stage
No,
and
you can do the same thing which you suggested, like the Tim Ferriss one example. What's the worst could happen? Apply the
yeah, I'll
same
just have
methodology.
a panic attack on stage and taking off and never doing a presentation again. No, I'll be fine.
If you
I
like
hope.
to know more about Ian, I think the website is Logo Geek GEEK dot UK, right? Or is it dot
It's
code?
.uk, but I've got, if you go .co.uk it redirects. If you go .com it redirects. I've got all the main domains secured. If you just Google Logo Geek, you'll be able to find me.
It is ranking heavily on SEO, so you should be able to find Ian quite easily. I have all the links on the show notes, event notes. You should be able to find it if you're listening to this on replay. I want to educate my listeners on the next week's episode. So I do my episodes live on every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to be speaking with Susanna Margison. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. I did not ask her how it's pronounced, but we would be speaking about navigating some of the common mistakes in conflict and reputation management. She's an expert in this field of conflict and reputation management. I don't know what I'm going to ask her, but I would find something interesting. If you have any interesting people you feel could be a good fit for my show, please send those DMs over with those links, with their profile information, and I would be able to find a spot. May not be on this season, but maybe the next season. I should be able to do that. I also want to let my listeners know that I'm really trying hard to go into video as well. But it's going to take a while. I have to find a way to get an affordable air conditioning. It is challenging and to combat the weather here. I'm just being very transparent. So till the time that doesn't happen, we're going to stick to LinkedIn audio, exactly the same format as it is. If you are interested in any of the articles which I write about podcasting, do follow me. If you're on LinkedIn, just hit the follow button along with the bell notification, and you should be able to receive all that content about podcasting which I'm posting as in 1 or 2 days whenever I get time. If you want to be a part of my email list, if you want to be notified about the guests I'm gonna have on my show, do send me a DM with your email address and mention subscribe. I should be able to add you onto that email list. I want to thank Ian once again for being patient. Thank you so much for answering all my tough questions, thought-provoking
worries.
questions. But this was a fun interview. Thank you so much for being such an awesome guest. Thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the best with your future endeavor and all the things which you're trying to do. Hopefully we will see another book maybe in the coming years.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Jason. Like I said, your organization for this has been incredible. Amazing questions. Like if there was an award for podcast organizer / host, you would be the winner.
Thank you, Ian.
Like
Thank
literally, your organization has been incredible. Like if people could see the amount of organization, like me as a podcast host, I literally send over my questions like 24 hours before, and the reason for that is because I haven't got them ready yet until then. But Jason had everything ready, like he's been keeping me updated for like the last month or so on things, and planning all these notes. It's just been amazing. Seriously.
I appreciate this very, very much, Ian. I'm thankful to have known you, and thank you so much for being such an awesome friend. I appreciate this very, very much, Ian. Thank you so much for those kind words.
Yeah, keep in touch. Thanks again for the opportunity.